not all, but such a large number of Native Americans just think it's okay to be poor? Like, yeah, okay, whatever. Yeah, something. That doesn't make sense. DEI, diversity. We have a lot of diversity. We have actually a fair amount of inclusion, because you can't even say in most all around the world, in most places in the world, inclusion and belonging are things that people really embrace. But we got this equity thing. So now what are we going to do? Universities, when you're deciding whether to admit applicants in the United States, you can't look at their race. You can look at all sorts of things. You can look at their records, you can look at where they're from, you can look at their school records. I mean, all of this, but you can't look at the race. It's just not fair.
Can I just interrupt for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Why is this important?
I think, why is this question important?
Why? Yeah. What is it? What makes this conversation about equity important? What is it that? What's the value?
Well,
like, the numbers don't look that fair, but at least, like, personally, like, I feel like it's kind of fair. It's like whoever put in the work, I guess. Whoever didn't.
Hey, listen, hang on. You don't have to be wishy-washy, really. Like, you don't have to say, like, oh, I guess. No. That's whoever put in the work. Say it, like, own that statement, man. Whoever put in the work, yeah.
What you said about your family, that's also not you, right? I mean, that's not fully individual responsibility, right? Somebody told you what to do.
I mean,
as opposed to a family that didn't tell you anything.
Like, for me, it was more like...
So the problem is, we're dealing with this struggle with understanding differences, understanding human behavior and differences in human behavior. So human behavior is shaped by things that are internal to us, how our motivations, how we think about things, how, all the stuff, our desires, our willingness to really push ourselves to do uncomfortable things, all of that, which in the end equates to responsibility, okay? Or over here, we have all of the behavior that is shaped by factors and forces outside of our control, structure, the history that our people went through, the history that our families went to, other people's decisions that impact our lives. I live in a community and some big corporation comes in and just buys up all this land and they start polluting the entire community. And so many people in our community that used to be healthy suddenly are getting sick. And it really destroys the community. And then the community just spirals into just chaos. And then you can't say, well, the people just spiraled into chaos. Like, the corporation that started polluting the community had something to do with that. So over here, the person who wants to really be healthy and do the right thing and, all the good stuff, their behavior is being shaped by what that corporation did. So the two are going together. And yet at the same time, well, even though the corporation did that, the person over here can decide, well, am I going to just fall over or am I going to go fight the corporation, let's say, okay? So this is important. You got to hold those two things. And then I looked at this question, showing that in the class that deals with race and ethnicity in groups, we see these big differences. So you have to say one of two things. You either have to say, well, what accounts for Native Americans, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans? This is going to be true all over the world. Different countries, Haitians, Dominicans. There's something about them that they're all making decisions to stay poor or do things that keep them poor. They're all doing that, and they just happen to all do it. There's something about them. There's something about their families, something about their culture. There's something about something. Or I'm a sociologist, and I think, it's interesting to look at people in that way, but it's kind of interesting to think that wait, all Native Americans just decide that it's really okay to just, not all, but such a large number of Native Americans just think it's okay to be poor? Like, yeah, okay, whatever. Yeah, something. That doesn't make sense to me as a sociologist. So I think, well, some do, and many do, and at some level they do, but there must be other things going on, because I don't know how else you could explain that. So I gave the example of Asians. Arjun, you remember? Like, yeah, you people from especially South Asia started coming in large numbers 2 decades ago, 2.5, 3 decades ago, coming with college degrees, coming with professional degrees, and so on. So they naturally just started moving ahead of other people who had been here, in Native Americans, from the very beginning. So that's history. That's where history has certain value. All right? And then go to the next slide. Like, these are reservations, in American Indian reservations. And you see, like, yeah, well, the government, the U.S. government came and created these reservations on, for the most part, very poor land. And then we pushed the original peoples onto that land. Well, that has something to do with it. So that's the structural stuff of inequality. But now we got to explain this, because we got to figure out what to do. What are we going to do? This is the equity. DEI, diversity. We have a lot of diversity. We have actually a fair amount of inclusion, because you can't even say in most all around the world, in most places in the world, inclusion and belonging are things that people really embrace. But we got this equity thing. So now what are we going to do? Do any of you know why this is important news?
Last year, affirmative action ended, and certain people thought that it would increase their chances into getting into certain universities.
Affirmative action? Which affirmative action?
Affirmative action as in, like, your race is considered when you apply to college?
When you apply to college.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Supreme Court said, no, can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so this article pretty much shows that for certain people at least, affirmative action ending didn't improve their chances on getting into these universities.
Well, here's the thing. Not all schools have reported their data yet. This just happened to be an article that showed up in the New York Times. Okay? For some schools are reporting that it appears to be, it's not having much of an impact at all. The idea is that the Supreme Court said, hey, you can't, universities, when you're deciding whether to admit applicants in the United States, you can't look at their race. You can look at all sorts of things. You can look at their records, you can look at where they're from, you can look at their school records. I mean, all of this, but you can't look at the race. It's just not fair. Because what appears to be happening is, it appears to be that people are not treating some people with equity. It's an unequal system. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, you made a good argument. Okay, so we're going to abandon that. How's affirmative action going to help bring about greater equality? How's it? Yeah, and then we're not going to touch fairness yet. How's it going to bring about greater equality?
I think it's just the fact that it takes into consideration certain historical and societal things that have happened in the country.
And then?
Like, for example, like, if you're black, it takes into consideration that, like, the data we saw earlier about the median, that, like, you may have not grown up in a neighborhood, for example, that had certain programs in place at your high school.
Okay.
So when they see that you're black on your application, they can be like, maybe they didn't have as many opportunities as the white person that grew up in an affluent neighborhood.
All right. Okay.
Can I just interrupt for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Why is this important?
I think, why is this question important?
Why? Yeah. What is it? What makes this conversation about equity important? What is it that? What's the value?
Well, it's what we're really fighting about. We have all of this inequality, okay, and we're trying to rectify it. We have things that we know are unfair for some people. We don't know who, when, how, what, but we know there's unfairness. And we know not everybody gets a fair shake. And so we step into the system and we start moving it around like we're playing with blocks when we're 5 years old. We got those wooden blocks. And we just keep moving them around to try to get the right shape and make it, we're going to move this over here, we're going to move this over here. And every time you move something, it impacts something else. Okay. So I want to know if we give Jade, if Penn State says, hey, Jade, we're going to give you like a few, we're going to advance you a little bit. What's the negative impact of that? It's good for her. What's the negative impact? Colin, what are people arguing? People who won the Supreme Court case, what did they say? Do you imagine they said?
Some people are given advantages over others when they have the equal merits to each other.
Okay. So you can assume that if we look at Jade and say, hey, you know what? We look at you, we're gonna move you forward. You got to assume 100,000 people apply to Penn State. You got to assume of all the people that they said no to, one of them is equal to Jade, if not multiple. But they didn't get looked at.
Colin, what's your example?
So my example would be, say that me and Jade have the same merits, same GPA, and we both applied to Harvard. It would be before this happened, it would be more likely that Jade would get in over I do.
If you were exactly the same.
If we were the exact same merits, exact same certain type of class, it would be the affirmative action would put Jade over me because of the different races.
And so what's the problem with that?
I think there's like more to that. Cause when it comes to like at least Harvard, like it's really white. I don't know. Like it's
Actually, it's not that white.
not that white.
No, look. 37% Asian,
It's very Asian.
16% Hispanic, 14% black. It's like whites are a minority.
When it comes to black people, at least within our own communities, right?
Okay.
We don't see like us going to Ivy Leagues as much as like our white peers.
Okay.
Because I went to a white high school and they got into more Ivies than all the black students, and like we applied there too.
Okay.
So sometimes it's like not always true. And like, what about the other white people that
No,
have the
but
same
there's an
stats?
assumption that you just made right there. Go ahead.
I grew up in a very white community too, and we had very few minority people. Majority of the minority people went to Ivy Leagues than my white friends.
Yeah, I mean what you
No,
just
it's not just that. It's different everywhere.
Yeah, but what you just said, you said because we don't know if the white students performed at the same level as the black and brown students. So like we don't know that. So that's an assumption we have to be careful to make. Okay, here's California. Population is 15.5% Asian. Berkeley, which is the top school in the California system, okay, this is like the Ivy League of, you have Harvard, or you have Berkeley and you have Stanford, right? 40% of the admits in 2023 are Asian. Okay? That seems, okay, what's going on here? New York City enrollment in the top high schools. This is 2018, and this is completely determined by test scores. Test scores. We're not going in and saying like, hey, what kind of clubs were you in? How many clubs were you president of? This is just test scores. How fair is that?
Like, the numbers don't look that fair, but at least, like, personally, like, I feel like it's kind of fair. It's like whoever put in the work, I guess. Whoever didn't.
Hey, listen, hang on. You don't have to be wishy-washy, really. Like, you don't have to say like, oh, I guess. No. Whoever put in the work. Say it like, own that statement, man. Whoever put in the work, yeah.
The numbers don't look fair, but I think it's fair. And I think that's really interesting.
That's huge.
Right? I mean, what does that mean? I mean, we know what it means in this moment because you're telling us. I think the numbers are talking about how disproportionately perhaps Asian students and families are studying or care about studying, right? But, The numbers, so interesting question about numbers being fair and
Yeah,
reality being fair, right?
That's a very cool statement.
Yeah.
How about one of you? How fair is this?
It might not look fair, but I agree. If you put on, it's more about what you do for it, like when you put in the work. This is based on the test scores. So if you don't work hard to try to get to where you want to go, that's on you. Like you have to work to where you want to get to. That's what life is.
Jade, can you weigh in on this? You don't have to agree with them, by the way. 100%.
I mean, yeah, like if you work hard, like you reap the benefits of that. But I think this is just the enrollment on the top high schools. Like we had to look at like where these people went to middle school. Like it's not always like some things start out small. Like you can't just say like here's high school and this is the enrollment for it.
Okay, so you want to go back and see something else.
Yeah.
So let me ask the two of you something, right? So you are over here. Say, yeah, listen, I'm going to assess fairness. We're going to go back to the personal decisions that people make, and you're going to assess it here. Yeah, well, you decide to work hard, or your family decide, Arjun, right? Your family says, yo, bro, lock the F in. All right, you're Indian. This is serious. Lock in, man. And you're like, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. And so you're here. So decisions that people make. And you pointed to something, and I want to hear the two of you respond to this. What about, look at fairness. I asked, how fair is that? Look at it now from structural questions. What about over here? And Jade just gave you one thing to look at. Well, where are these kids coming from? Where are they coming from? That's a structural thing here. You don't just lock in, you lock in, but you lock in. What about the other kids who are not? The 3.5% Black and Hispanic kids. It's like, how fair, I don't want to lead, I don't want to do it.
Well, I'm actually also, what you said about your family, that's also not you, right? I mean, that's not fully individual responsibility, right? Somebody told you what to do.
I mean,
as opposed to a family that didn't tell you anything.
Like for me, it was more like when I was a kid in like elementary school, my parents were more like, I mean, elementary through middle school, and like I guess like maybe ninth grade, they were more like they wanted to build my foundation as in terms of like get good, because like in like your lower years, they want to build my like skills like that, or like mathematical skills or like academic skills. And then after like ninth grade, they were more like, you don't got to worry too much about scores, like just like, because like now that like you have that base, it's more up to you. They were like, that was definitely like a little bit different, I would say, like than like a lot of other people's experiences. But they definitely did care about like, all right, like are you really totally slacking, or like do you not care about school no more? But like since they built that base for me, then I could like, they just kind of like was like, all right,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Like they don't care as much about like scores or like where I go, because they already built, like when you're younger, they want to build that like,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
But that still connects to what Jade is saying. Where'd you come from?
Okay.
Right? Whether it's your middle school or your family, right, that gave you a foundation. I'm just saying it's a factor that you're asking us to look at.
Yeah, absolutely.